Hi, welcome back to another episode of Stand on Guard. I'm your host, David Crayden. I'll be back in mere moments here with a special guest who's been here before, but I just can't get enough of his analysis. Colonel Douglas MacGregor. We'll be right back.
The Prime Minister lied and his minions continue to lie.
Your home is your castle. We're calling on the government to introduce and immediately pass the Stand on Guard law.
But we also need to resolve to resist.
Okay. We'll do it live. Okay. No. We'll do it live. I'll write it and we'll do it live.
Yes, we're doing it live as we always do. Thank you so much for joining me on this Thursday morning in this very snowy Ottawa. It's a great pleasure to welcome back to the show Colonel Douglas MacGregor. And I've been watching your analysis all week, all over the place. Like I said before we started, I don't know how you keep up this pace, sir.
Yeah, well, we had a nice week here up until this point. It was in the 80s, Fahrenheit, very warm and sunny and beautiful. And now all of a sudden we have lots of rain coming down, and we're being warned that the temperatures that are now about 70 could drop into the 20s or something, and we might get some snow. So there's widespread panic. People here don't react well to snow.
Yeah, it's been balmy here lately, and now suddenly we had the ice storm the other day, and hopefully spring is on the way. I hate winter as much as anybody, but it's interesting you joined me today. I've been trying to get you on the show for quite a while. I know you're so busy, but is this day 13 of this war? I think that's very emblematic of how weird things are, because, of course, the last time we were involved with Iran, now it's called a 12-day war. I guess that's the sequel to the 6-day war from 60 years earlier. But it's incredible to me when this thing started. I know you were one of the people saying this is not going to go well. You've been warning about this for months, for years, actually. And I remember hearing Defense or War Secretary, whatever he wants to call himself. I understand, by the way, that it's not legal technically to call it Department of War because Congress hasn't authorized it yet.
It's true.
Yeah, so it's still the Defense Department, and he's still the Defense Secretary, whether he wants to call himself something else or not. But here's Pete Hegseth the other day saying, this is not like Iraq. This is not like Afghanistan. This is a different kind of war. And I thought, yeah, sure. But as I've watched this war unravel over the last 2 weeks, I'm thinking, you're damn right. It's a different kind of war. It doesn't even look like it's successful at the beginning. Whereas Iraq, if you watch at the beginning, you're saying, looks like things are going well. And the same with Afghanistan. And it wasn't until the occupation that things started to very, very quickly. But are you looking at this and saying, oh my God, we've got to get off of this road? I think you said to Tucker Carlson the other day that we're going downhill fast. And if we don't stop this, put some brakes on, there's catastrophe at the end.
Well, the thing that's concerned me from the very beginning is that we would not achieve our objectives. Assuming there are any attainable objectives, we started out by saying we wanted regime change. And so we adopted the Israeli program of assassination, killing lots of people that we thought would effectively render the whole structure incapable. That failed. And so then we turned to national destruction. We're going to destroy Iran and punish them until they're on their knees. And we're declaring unconditional surrender. So unless they're willing to unconditionally surrender their nation of 93 million people, that's the size of Western Europe, then this war will go on. Well, right now, the war hasn't gone well insofar as the Iranians, though they've taken a beating from the air, which is something most of us expected. They have been surprisingly effective with their missile strikes and their drones. Their intelligence coverage of the whole region is excellent. I think that's due in part to Chinese and Russian assistance. The population is holding together. The society is holding together, and they have a new leader. And this new leader recently announced, I was just going through it before I started with you, that he's lifting the prohibition on nuclear weapons and has now accepted the fact that Iran needs a nuclear weapon. So I suppose our great achievement has been to convince the Iranians that they very much need a nuclear weapon, along with, I suppose, large numbers of countries in the world who figure that if they don't get a nuclear weapon, they're going to end up like Iran, being attacked ruthlessly. But we're happy that at least we've beaten down the air defenses and we're bombing various places. And now President Trump announces he's run out of bombs or places to bomb, frankly, and is intimating that something much worse, so bad it could happen to Iran that the war would be over within an hour. So you don't have to be a genius to figure out he's threatening a nuclear strike. This is always what I worried about.
That is so ominous. But of course, what else can you expect when you say it's either unconditional surrender or it's the end of the state? So we're pushing them in this direction. I read your piece on Substack. A war without strategy is a war without end. You've referred to this quite a bit, and I think you referred to strategy there. And say about U.S. military planning in the past, from the Civil War, certainly to the Civil War, to the Second World War, is that military strategy was very evident, and there was a plan. Civil War, the Anaconda strategy, to naval blockade of the South, followed by Western and Eastern campaigns, and it worked. Second World War, Europe is first, and George Marshall had a very distinct plan for that one. Europe is first, invade Africa, invade Italy, then invade France, then Japan comes next. And it worked. What I'm seeing from the United States right now is a complete lack of any plan. And we have Donald Trump coming out one day saying, the war is over, we can all go home now. On the same day, his defense secretary is out saying, we're going to escalate the bombing. So is there a strategy here at all that not even a strategy, it's workable? Does the United States even know what it wants to do in this war besides hold up Israel's line?
Well, I think you just hit the nail on the head. When you listen to Donald Trump, you're really listening to Mr. Netanyahu. When you look at the demands that Donald Trump is making, those demands are Mr. Netanyahu's. You will not enrich any uranium. In other words, you will have no nuclear capability, civilian or otherwise, in your country. Number two, you will effectively dismantle all of your long-range strike capability, your arsenal of ballistic missiles. That means that you live in a state of permanent vulnerability to Israel's attack. Then finally, you will abandon all your friends and allies in the region or anywhere else. You can't cooperate with anybody, which means that the people that would otherwise cooperate with you would be systematically destroyed once again by Israel. So these are not American demands. We have no particular reason to want to destroy Iran. So when you hear Donald Trump say, well, they'd better give up and do what we say, or, they could face oblivion, that's really what Mr. Netanyahu wants. I think if you ran a referendum in the United States and asked everyone whether or not we should go to war with Iran, I think almost everyone would say no. You'll have a small number, particularly people my age, who have been swallowing this violent anti-Iranian, anti-Tehran propaganda for decades. So they're already convinced that Iran is a satanic state that must be quashed. But I would say that's less than 30% of the population. The rest of the population that votes, they're saying, what, this is crazy. We don't want anything to do with it. The sad part is that no one on the Hill who should actually gives a damn that over the last 47 years, there has been profound change in Iran. It's not the same state that it was in 1979, but it's Israel's purpose to convince everyone that nothing has changed. And unfortunately, because over many years, the Zionist billionaires, as part of the larger Jewish lobby, have purchased the Congress and now the White House, they're getting what they want, which is the destruction of Iran.
I just want to show these two short clips here President Donald Trump seemingly not knowing what the hell was going on with that bombing of the Iranian elementary school, which has been such a visceral incident for so many people. And I looked at this, absolute horror, and I couldn't believe this. I know Scott Ritter has said a lot about this, probably being a failure of artificial intelligence because they're relying on AI to pick the targets now. And this is horrifying to me. But here's Donald Trump, first of all, saying it's Iran's fault. And then
did the United States bomb a girls' elementary school in southern Iran on the first day of the war and kill 175 people?
In my opinion, based on what I've seen, that was done by Iran.
Is that true, Mr. Hegseth? It was Iran who did that?
We're certainly investigating.
Still investigating.
But the only side that targets civilians is Iran.
So the only side that targets civilians is Iran. Okay, got it, Pete. Now Trump has asked yesterday about new developments. And in fact, the New York Times, of all places, has done a very exhaustive study, investigation into this, and has basically concluded, of course, it was U.S. Tomahawk missiles. Here's Trump. Yes.
A new report says that the military investigation has found that the United States struck the school in Iran. As commander-in-chief, you take responsibility for that.
That is what?
As commander-in-chief, do you...
For what?
For the strike on the school in Iran. A new report says the military investigation has found it was the United States that struck the school.
I don't know about it.
All right, so if I was the president of the United States, and I have to mention, of course, you were an advisor to the defense secretary in Donald Trump's first administration. So you were at some point in that position. But I would think if Donald Trump should be very concerned about this file, because it means a hell of a lot in terms of world public opinion, how the United States responds to this. And we've had apologies from some senators, including Senator John Kennedy, Republican Louisiana. But Donald Trump is now feigning ignorance. Like he knows nothing about this. And yet he was very sure the other day that Iran did this. And Pete Hegseth chiming in that only Iranians target civilians, not us. So is Donald Trump losing his grip on this war or on the presidency? Can we even comment on that?
Well, one thing that was interesting, if you watched the first clip that you showed, the reporter asked President Trump, and he answered, as you heard, and then he turned and said, well, what about you, Secretary Hegseth? What do you think? Well, that's very interesting to me, because normally if the president says something, people believe it. It was very obvious to anyone who was watching this that whatever President Trump said was not believed. And so then they turned their attention to Hegseth. And if you look at his face, he was shocked. He didn't expect to be asked anything. And then he said, yeah, that's right. No, we didn't do that. And the only side in this war that targets civilians is Iran. I mean, that was his response ultimately. But he was quite shocked that he was asked. So I think, frankly, President Trump's credibility is razor thin at this point. I think lots of people no longer believe what he says. That's very bad for a president. That explains one of the reasons for his very low popularity. The second part is I know what Scott Ritter said, and he may be right. I just don't know enough about what is going on today. I know from experience with the Air Force, they had so many different targeteer levels, 6 different levels with at least 24 different people going over imagery and maps and everything else to ensure the target that had been selected was in fact the target they thought it was. It's hard for me to imagine that we deliberately did such a thing. Now, if AI was used and no one checked the AI, that's a fatal mistake. But again, it's hard for me to believe the Air Force could have done that. I mean, my experience with the Air Force in these matters is they're very, very thorough and absolutely honest about it. I mean, we had a problem in Kosovo, or not Kosovo, but in Bosnia, as you will recall, because you were over there, I guess, shortly thereafter. And we were bombing in Kosovo, bombing for the Serbs for theoretically liberating Kosovo. And we destroyed the Chinese embassy. And we went back over that, the people in the Air Force that had put that together, and that was simply a mistake. People mistook that for something else. Now, I don't rule out the possibility that we took this school for something else. I do not believe it was deliberately bombed, knowing full well that we were going to kill all these children. I just think it would have been best for President Trump. And frankly, if he had done that, then the Secretary of Defense, or War, as you say, would have said the same thing. And that is, well, we have it under investigation. But if it turns out that we did, in fact, bomb this, I'm sure this was a mistake. And in any case, I feel sympathy for those who lost their children. And I can assure you that I deeply regret the loss of life in this setting, as we all do in any war. I mean, something like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. Obviously. And that's, you talked about credibility. And of course, famously, we talked about the credibility gap with Lyndon Johnson during the Vietnam War, because people realized he wasn't telling the truth. And the General Westmoreland wasn't. Body counts were all fake, and everything was wrong about this. So it seems to me, here we are on day 13 of the war, and there's already an evident credibility gap with President Trump on this. And I don't understand, beyond serving Israel, why he got involved in this, because it's a no-win situation for America. And I asked the question, is this the end of the American empire, at least in the Middle East? I know you've said, why the hell would they want us to stay? Why would they invite us back after all of these bases are destroyed? Do they really think we're going to go back there, clean up this mess, and the status quo is going to resume? I mean, do you think that's even feasible?
No. In fact, I think it's unsustainable. First of all, we're not talking about the economic and financial repercussions. We've essentially sent the world economy into a tailspin. We've really harmed some of the states that we have historically considered to be allies and friends. We forget that Japan draws roughly 73% of its oil from the Persian Gulf. The Republic of Korea, South Korea, somewhere in the neighborhood of 65 to 68%. India, more than 50%. China, more than 50%. Of course, foolish people here want to turn China into an enemy they can attack. Good luck with that. That's an exceedingly stupid idea. But my point is that the nations that are friendly to us are suffering terribly. Europe, of course, we've seen all the prices in Asia go from 70, 80 to 90% increase. In Europe, it's gone from 70 almost up to 100% increase. And we're talking about electricity. We're talking about all the products that are produced that use petroleum, everything from plastics to gasoline and diesel and so forth. This is a catastrophe for us. And our attitude here, at least in the administration, is, well, so what? This is for the betterment of all. Really? Well, if it's for the betterment of all, why are we now at least intimating that we might use a nuclear weapon? Now, I'm not surprised that that attitude is coming out of Israel, because their view is that all of these people are subhuman and deserve to die. Let's be frank. That's been made very clear by people like Ben-Gvir and others in the Netanyahu cabinet. Netanyahu, in his speeches in Hebrew, repeats this over and over and over again. So it doesn't matter if you're living in and around the region with Israel, you're essentially dead meat as far as the Israelis are concerned. We don't adopt that position. I certainly don't. And I think the majority of Americans do not. So I don't think this is going to turn out well for us, regardless of what we decide to do next. And I do think it's important for us to understand that the Iranians, though their air defenses haven't performed very well, their missiles and drones have performed brilliantly, and they continue to do so. And I feel sorry for the Air Force officers who stand up there like General Kane and continually read from a piece of paper saying, well, we flew this number of sorties, we dropped these bombs, we hit these targets, and we're winning. Okay. I listened to that for 8 years in Vietnam, right? Every other night, somebody would come on and tell us how we were defeating everybody, killing everybody, and winning. I don't think we understand this is a 93 million soul nation. This is a large country with a distinguished history, a real cultural foundation and past called the Persian Empire. These people are not going to roll over for us. They're not going to surrender. So you better come up with something other than let's nuke them.
Yeah, I think one of the fascinating elements of this war is that we always look at previous wars and say the technology, had advanced beyond the tactics. And we see that in the Civil War with mass charges against the rifled guns. And people in First World War, of course, same thing, machine guns mowing down troops who were just literally sometimes walking into gunfire. But in this war, what I'm seeing, and I think you've said much the same thing, is that it's like U.S. technology has been surpassed because it's no longer the era of the aircraft carrier, which was established in the Second World War. The battleship was basically obsolete at that point. Aircraft carriers ruled. But now, of course, with drones costing like $50,000, $60,000 each, and the anti-ballistic elements costing $50 million to produce, seems to me it's a lot more economical to send drones in the air. And it's almost like the U.S. is saying, well, we've got the most powerful military in the world and nothing can stop us. And clearly, yeah, you've run out of vital armaments. You've run out of weapons. Iran is continuing to fire cheap drones that are very, very effective. And I'm not sure aircraft carriers now aren't just sitting ducks out there.
Well, they're not quite sitting ducks as long as they can position themselves far enough away so that they're out of range. I mean, let's put it that way. The second thing we haven't seen, other than an American submarine that torpedoed this frigate that was sitting off the coast of Ceylon or Sri Lanka, submarines really rule the waves. And the Chinese and the Russians have invested very heavily in submarines. And that's the real invincible, invulnerable weapon at sea right now. It's very difficult to hunt, find, and sink submarines. So there's a lot more going on here, but you're basically right. So we have two different types of warfare being fought. We have the United States that's using its historic instruments of offensive warfare to interfere, disrupt, or invade other people's countries. And that's really what we developed in the aftermath of the Second World War. That's coming to an end. There's no question about that. It's also prohibitively expensive. And you wear out lots of people that don't want to join the Navy because they don't care to spend a year of their lives or more on an aircraft carrier or any other ship. I mean, there are a lot of problems with this whole thing. And training is a big problem. If you wear people out, which we do frequently by having them go to do something, they never get a chance to sit back, relax, and then vigorously train with a purpose in mind. And we haven't re-examined our own force structure and how we do business. So you're absolutely right. I don't know how we get out of this. Certainly, I don't see how we get out of it demanding unconditional surrender from people who aren't going to surrender. And I would add that if they're subjected to a nuclear strike by the Israelis, because I really don't think, though Donald Trump may intimate that he would do that, I don't think he would. I think he has more common sense than that would indicate. But I think the hatred inside Israel for everybody in the region is so great that Mr. Netanyahu may well do something like that. That is not going to solve the problem. And if anything, I think it could shorten the life of the Israeli state. And that's what I've said from the beginning to my friends in Israel. They don't seem to understand what they've done since 7 October over the last several years. It's catastrophic for them. They've handled this in the worst possible way.
Yeah, it's mind-boggling to me, too. I come from an evangelical background where we're very pro-Israel. I've never called myself a Zionist. I've never said Israel, whatever they do is always right. My Israel, right or wrong. I would never have said that. I can't even imagine people saying that at post-Gaza. But I'm still hearing that from people saying, well, this is about Israel. We have to be there for Israel. And you talked about Israel, the possibility, the potential of Israel threatening or possibly using a nuclear device. We know they've had the bomb since the Kennedy era. They've always denied they've had it. Everybody knows they have it. The only country in that region, basically, that has the nuclear weapon. But you raised the specter the other day in an interview saying that Iran could possibly be provided with a nuclear bomb by Pakistan. which is something. I mean, I don't even know if most people realize that Pakistan is a member of the nuclear club, but yes, they are, and so is India. So is that a real possibility that Pakistan could reach out and say, okay, look, you have been threatened by Israel. We are prepared to back you up, Iran, with a nuclear bomb?
Yes. And I don't know that.
Oh, you're muted, Doug.
Are we good?
Yeah, you're good now. Yeah.
That's the cat. I'm sorry.
Oh, it's okay.
He mutes me when he wants attention. So the problem is, I don't really think that. I don't know. Let's put it that way. It's not impossible that they could do that, but it's more likely that something would be delivered by air or in another manner. In any case, I think it's real. I think it should be taken seriously. We now have the successor to the original or to the latest supreme leader, who's now stepped up and said he's going to lift that fatwa prohibiting the development of a nuclear weapon. And this is the other aspect of this war that I just don't think we care very much about. We don't understand that what we're really teaching the world is that if you want to be left alone, if you don't want to be invaded, brutalized by the United States because for some reason we don't like you, that you've got to have a nuclear weapon. I think we're going to see the proliferation of nuclear weapons all over the world.
Yeah, and that of course is what this war was supposed to be about, was to stop nuclear proliferation. But I think the exact opposite could be the case. You were asked the other day about an off-ramp for President Trump for the United States, and you suggested possibly some intervention from India with Prime Minister Modi. Do you still think that is a good possibility or something that would work?
Well, it's a possibility. It depends heavily on President Trump and what he wants or doesn't want to do. He's been saying they have to talk to me. They have to negotiate with me. I'm in charge. You have to surrender to me. This is kind of his mentality. There's no future for that. This war will go on and on and on. And as I said before, you pick a city somewhere in Iran and decide that you're going to strike it with a nuclear weapon, you've made a counterstrike against Israel inevitable. Israel will not last long after that. And I think that's what Mr. Trump needs to understand, and I think he needs to make that clear to Mr. Netanyahu. So to whom do you turn for some sort of ceasefire agreement that would facilitate over time a new relationship? I think Prime Minister Modi is a good choice. He has good relations with the Israelis. He's historically gotten along well with Iran. He's a neutral. India is neutral. It's not a party to the war, but India is profoundly affected by this war. India, perhaps almost more than anybody else, given its dependence on fertilizer for its agricultural sector and so many different elements that go into production, everything from tires to plastics to you name it. And a lot of these industries, believe it or not, in India are shutting down because they just don't have access to petroleum. So I think he might be a good choice, and at least they'll listen to him. You see, we've lied so much to so many people about so many things. Nobody believes us anymore. The Russians, they'll be polite to us, but they don't care what we say or do. Mr. Witkoff and Mr. Kushner have no credibility whatsoever. They're not really diplomats, and they're busy with side deals designed to enrich themselves and Mr. Trump and his friends. So everybody knows that. Why will they take them seriously? They won't. The Russians don't. Chinese don't. And I don't see any evidence that the Iranians will. So you got to step back and say, we can't do this. Mr. Trump has rejected any experienced diplomats, any objective and thoughtful observers from the diplomatic community. He doesn't listen. And so where do you go? I don't know that you could go too much to anybody else with any hope of success. And then you have to exercise some patience. And of course, we're the microwave society. in some ways, President Trump embodies many of the attributes of American national character. We want everything. We want it now, you know, over and over and over again. And this is something that's not going to be solved quickly. But I think that Mr. Modi has the best shot at going in and negotiating some sort of ceasefire. And that's what everybody in the Persian Gulf needs. I think Israel needs it. Whether or not they admit it, they've taken enormous damage, terrible damage. And contrary to popular belief, our anti-missile systems have not worked very well. And now we're stripping out THAAD batteries and THAAD radars from South Korea, which the South Koreans will be delighted to get rid of. They never wanted those things in their country because the Chinese immediately said, well, if you do this, we're going to have to build new nuclear weapons designed to defeat these things. And the Koreans didn't want those in their country anyway. So I think the Koreans are happy to see that go. And I guess all of that's going to protect Israel. But we should have figured out right now that radars and these anti-missile missile batteries aren't very effective. They can be overwhelmed. They can be defeated. So I don't think these are good answers in the short run. I don't think the threats make any sense. I think it's time for some adults to take over, to be blunt. And I think the principal adult in the room is probably Prime Minister Modi.
Yeah, I think that's a very sane possibility in all this. Were you concerned of reports that desalination plants are being bombed in? Obviously, you're concerned, but I had no idea until this war began how much of the Middle East is reliant upon these desalination plants. Iran, not so much as some other countries, but there's very little fresh water in the region, and they are literally their lives are connected to these desalination plants. There's no fresh water without it. So if this continues, this would create a massive humanitarian catastrophe, potentially millions of deaths. And yes. I found it amazing that this was even considered to be an option, but they delivered on it. And thankfully, I think up to this point, Iran has shown great restraint in not creating more of a crisis with this.
Well, I think there's a tendency to misread what's going on between Iran and the Gulf states. You have foolish people in the United States. Well, Iran's made a terrible mistake. They've attacked these states in the Gulf, and that's wonderful because they're allied with us and they'll stick with us. No, Iran attacked them because they've played a duplicitous game. On the one hand, they've made nice with Iran, but on the other, what have they done? They've turned over their airfields, their airspace facilities to us, to the intelligence agencies and so forth. The Iranians have had it, and they have skillfully dismantled the bases and the facilities in these countries. And they're sick of Saudi Arabia because Saudi Arabia has also played the same duplicitous game. And the Saudis were trying to murder all the Houthis. They started that years ago, trying to kill as many people as possible. They probably killed a couple of 100,000 people down in Yemen over the years. So I think the Iranians have demonstrated to them, look, this is, absolutely unacceptable. But you're right. The Israelis struck that desalinization plant unnecessarily. And Iran could respond. I think Iran will wait to see whether or not any pressure is brought to bear by us on behalf of the Arabian Peninsula and the people that live there, because you're right. You destroy those plants, and there's a much, much larger population living in that peninsula today in all of these Arab states than ever lived there in the past. And the water content, the water table upon which they've been dependent for centuries is not large enough to support much life, especially the states on the Gulf. They will simply go out of existence. And to be frank with you, they may. And there's another aspect to this thing that I don't think a lot of people in the West understand. A lot of people in the Arabian Peninsula that live there are sick of the elites that govern them. They have been very upset and become very angry over the failure of these countries to present any resistance to the mass murder and expulsion campaign in Gaza and the West Bank. And the elites have simply sold out the Arabs that live in Palestine because it benefited them to do so with Israel, and we've rewarded them, for going along with this. And we, of course, have underwritten and supported this campaign. So there's not a whole lot of sympathy in the broader population for this very pro-Israeli policy that their elites have followed. And to be frank, a lot of the people that live in that peninsula look upon their elites as another version of the Epstein class. So there's a lot more going on in the Muslim world, particularly in the Arabian Peninsula, than we realize. It's also true in Egypt. The Egyptian elites have been afraid to do anything for fear that they would be overthrown. And it's amazing to me that has not yet happened, because the Egyptian population is absolutely rabidly anti-Israeli because of what's happened in Gaza and the West Bank.
Are you surprised we're not seeing more video footage? Or maybe you're not surprised, because I know you were in combat in the Gulf War. And of course, General Norman Schwarzkopf, every day at his press briefings, one video after another of sites being bombed with these smart bombs, and everything was going glowingly. And yet Trump has claimed we've destroyed the Iranian Navy, which I understand is not that large anyway, and destroyed the Iranian Air Force. It's all gone. But
it was almost non-existent. There was almost no Air Force at all.
It was fairly dominant in the region under the Shah, but I don't think it's really recovered from that. But why are we not seeing any video footage of this tremendous, horrific destruction that the administration is alleging is going on here? And I've seen footage of the torpedoes sinking the ship off in the Indian Ocean from the U.S. Navy, but I've not seen a lot of video footage. Are they making a lot of this? Are they making this up? Are they making the casualty figures up? Are they making the numbers of deaths up?
Well, first of all, we don't know what the real casualty figures are on our friendly side, on the American side. The Iranians have lost a few thousand people. Now, is that 4,000, 5,000, 6,000? I don't know, but they've lost thousands of people, no doubt about it. And they will freely admit that. And many of their hospitals have been destroyed from the air. Aid stations. I mean, we haven't been too careful about this sort of thing, and neither has Israel. And the argument is always, well, they hide things under hospitals. Well, I don't think that's the case in Iran. But the point is that you're not wrong. But on the other hand, I have seen videos of the airstrikes and some of the missile strikes, and they're profound. There's no question about it. The problem is that we tend, on the whole, to equate film footage of an explosion on the ground with some kind of victory. In other words, we blew this up, we must be winning. Well, we blew an awful lot of things up during the Second World War, only to discover that, gosh, when we got in there, it wasn't quite what we anticipated. And in fact, it did nothing but stiffen the resolve of the opposing force. People were angry because their relatives were killed. Someone sat me down recently and explained that two of the neighborhoods that we had decimated in Tehran were filled with people who were very anti-regime in their orientation, because they were almost all middle and upper middle class people that were sick of the theocracy. Well, we killed most of them. Is that going to help us? Absolutely not. And this is the great myth that there would be some sort of rebellion that resulted from our attack on Iran. No, it's done the opposite. People are Iranian nationalists. They believe in their country. They want to defend it. So they're sticking with the regime. They're not running away from it, not because they love it. Most of them don't. If we had not begun this process of bombing, I think in 6 months there would have been a new government in Iran. That's how far things have come, because the population wants to live a normal, largely secular life. And there was a recognition, even inside the theocracy, that they were going to have to make these accommodations, or they would not avoid a rebellion. But now that we've bombed and killed so many people, I think that's postponed for some period of time. You'll recall that after the Kosovo air campaign was over, there was no regime change in Belgrade. That came almost a year later. And then the population said, thank you very much, Milosevic, you need to leave. In other words, when you begin to equate the use of military power with a political outcome that you desire, you can get into a lot of trouble. And that's what we've done in Iran. We're not going to get what we want. We're going to get the opposite. And in fact, it's so interesting to listen to people, because somebody sent me something today and said, well, we see the new supreme leader says he's lifting that prohibition. Well, let's kill him and then just nuke him. I mean, This is the sort of crap that comes through from people. Now they're all my age or older. They're boomers, if you will, and that boomer generation isn't very rational on these matters.
No, not very rational. Oh, there's been talk about a draft, and I couldn't believe yesterday Congress passed a bill where there was an involuntary registration as part of this. So whether you want to draft or not, there's the fabric or the framework now exists to do that. But as I mentioned to you, I served with the U.S. Army in Tuzla, Bosnia. I was seconded to the U.S. Army from the Canadian Armed Forces as an Air Force officer, public affairs officer. And one of the questions I always asked Army officers was, did you support the dissolution of the end of the draft under President Nixon? Because obviously that was something he felt was necessary. But everybody always told me that was something the military wanted more than anybody else, because the draft tends to bring in people who just don't want to be there and are nothing but malcontents and are problems. So why on earth are we talking about reinstating the draft, especially at this time in history?
Well, first of all, I don't think it's serious. If it were done, there would be open rebellion inside the country. I've always felt that a selective draft, able-bodied men with at least a minimum IQ of 100 should serve, for 2 years, men between the ages of, say, 18 and 25. I've always felt that would be a good thing, but understanding that service was here inside the United States, that we were going to defend the United States. If you talk to people and said, we're going to have to bring people into the military to defend America, defend the Mexican border, that would go down very well with large numbers of Americans. Americans love their country. They will fight for the country. But people would then say, what are we doing in Iran? And the other fallacy, of course, that has to be exposed is the notion that we can repeat Desert Storm, that we could move hundreds of thousands of troops all the way to Saudi Arabia from Germany, from the United States, without interference, that somehow or another no one will shoot the planes down, no one will torpedo the ships. And even more dangerous, if you get to the harbor or the locations where you want to disembark and organize, that those places will not be targeted immediately for theater ballistic missile strikes, because we have persistent surveillance above us. We can see everything, so the enemy can see everything, and they can strike those places. One thing that I remember standing in the port of Al-Shabaab, and I was talking to the regimental commander, and I said, I hope we get the hell out of here as soon as possible. He said, yes, because I said, if Saddam Hussein decides to launch 40 or 50 Scud missiles at the port of Al-Shabaab, this operation is over. It's done. He never did. He could have. I'm very grateful that he didn't. This was something else that came up before the Kosovo Air Campaign. The Air Force generals told General Clark, if you want us to hit the Serbs, then let us hit them right now in their barracks, in their cantonment areas. We can get them all. And he said, well, we can't do that. We have to have this permission from NATO and Washington and everything else. And they said, well, once the forces deploy and they move out into the field in Kosovo and around Serbia, we're not going to get much. Well, they were right. Absolutely right, which is one of the reasons this Kosovo Air Campaign was not the deal breaker for the Serbs. It was Russia's abandonment of Serbia. The Russians said they negotiated with Strobe Talbot, or Strobe Talbot went to Moscow to negotiate with them. He was the Deputy Secretary of State. He made promises. I don't know what they involved, aid, assistance, and so forth. And in return, the Russians agreed, well, we'll pull the plug on the Serbs, because they had told the Serbs, we will provide you with food, medicine, and fuel to get through the winter. Because when this thing started, that's what Milosevic was concerned about, the winter a year from then. In other words, a winter that would start in October, November of that year. And he knew he couldn't get through that without help, because eventually we would bomb the heating plants, the electrical grid, and everything else. Well, when it became clear the Russians wouldn't support it and pulled the plug, that's when Milosevic said, well, we've got to get the troops out because we can't keep this up. Right now, we're in a position where I don't think the air campaign, unless, of course, they start the nuclear strikes, which I hope and pray doesn't even come up for serious discussion, it's not going to produce the outcome that we want. So what are you going to do? How do you proceed? And that's why I think Prime Minister Modi would be a good choice to go in and find out, what can we do? How do we bring this to a close?
And just want to show this brief clip of Newt Gingrich expressing, I think we might describe as some sense of not defeat, but some sense of perhaps things might not be going our way.
Look, there are three huge challenges that this administration has tackled. The first is that, and they should have frankly moved on this on day one, they have to keep the Strait of Hormuz open.
Yes.
I don't care what it costs. If they can't keep it open, this war will in fact be an American defeat before very long, because the entire world, including the American people, will react to the price of oil if the Strait stays closed very long. So I lived through this with Reagan, as you did, in the late 80s. Keeping the Strait open is the number one job because it buys you time for the two other jobs. The second job is we're going to discover that the Revolutionary Guard is tougher than we thought it was, better connected, and have at least 200,000 people who are true believers, and they have no future. I mean,
right.
Trump can say unconditional surrender.
Right.
These folks know if they lose power, they have no future. And the third challenge is, how do you arouse and organize the street, the 85 million or so people in Iran who do not want the current regime, but they're unarmed, they're unorganized, and that has to be solved. These three problems are going to decide whether this was a stroke of genius or, frankly, a step into quicksand.
A stroke of genius or a step into quicksand. I think that is very interesting, especially since Newt Gingrich is very friendly with the administration, but he's revealing there, I think, some serious doubts. And some people have actually I'm not sure if you have yourself, but have actually raised the possibility that it might be Iran issuing the surrender. I don't believe the United States has much room left here.
No, I don't think so. And every time you hear someone like Hegseth or the president say what they're going to experience next is the most terrible shock Iran has ever known in its entire history. Mankind will be shocked by what happens. You make these over-the-top hyperbolic statements, you make a fool out of yourself. So we've already had days of intense bombing that were designed to persuade everybody, oh, please stop, we give up. That's not going to happen. Number one is what Newt Gingrich said, and he's right. And we always knew that that would be the first thing that happened. And we have assumed that the United States Navy and Marine Corps and Air Force will all go in there and make sure this didn't happen. Well, that had no chance of occurring, none whatsoever. And if we had put all those forces in the Gulf with that goal in mind, they would have been obliterated by all the missiles and drones. As for the other two things, he's dreaming. He's out to lunch on that. I don't see that there was ever any evidence whatsoever for a rebellion to be stoked by us and given a path to success. Nations change when the populations are ready for it, not when somebody from the outside induces it. No one ran into the arms of the advancing U.S. and British armies during 1944-45. That's nonsense. And nobody in Japan did that either. That doesn't happen. Nation states change when the populations decide it's time for change and their leaders agree with them, or they get new leaders. So that's just, forget it. As far as the Republican or the Revolutionary Guard is concerned, yeah, they're embedded throughout the society, but they've also changed quite a bit as well. But they, like everyone else in the armed forces and in the population at large, are nationalists. They're going to fight no matter what. It's not just because, well, they get a stipendium, a special stipendium that gives them a better dinner than somebody else. There's more going on here. So number one, he's spot on. And we're already well down the road to failure as a result of that. I don't see any evidence that we can reverse it right now.
Well, it seems to me as well, now Gingrich has insulated himself from the realization that there's not 85 million Iranians poised to capture the capital for him. And does he not realize that bombing elementary schools, killing the leader's grandchild, is going to alienate and anger the hell out of this country? And I keep hearing people say, Iran hates us. Iran hates us. I don't understand why. But
well, I've met Newt Gingrich, and I haven't seen him for several years. He's quite advanced in age, but he's very much in bed with the Israel lobby, and he's in bed with the old Republican power structure. So he's going to be very careful how far he goes. And that's why I say just forget the second 2 points. They're not rooted in reality. And instead, look at the first one, because that's the deal breaker. And the only other thing that I would have said that he hasn't said is, I'm very surprised at the resilience of Iranian military power. I'm impressed with the engineering prowess and the damage that they managed to do. Stop and consider. They never had an Air Force worth a damn since the Shah left. And they have wisely stopped investing heavily in it. Now, they may have gotten some aircraft from the Russians and the Chinese, that's fine. But they put their money into missiles and drones. And then secondly, there was never much of a Navy. 7 old frigates, large numbers of patrol boats and little fast boats. So you've got a nation of 93 million that really doesn't have an army, doesn't have a Navy or an Air Force. And with an army armed to the teeth with missiles, has held off the world's great military superpower, especially if you listen to Donald Trump tells you, well, we're the best, we're the greatest, we're this and that. I mean, that's a hell of an achievement. Now we're going to try and rectify that through a nuclear strike. God, I hope not, because that will just spell the end of Israel. And we could ultimately suffer as well for that.
Yeah, well, I think you've said that if you use nuclear weapons in a war like this, you normalize the use of nuclear weapons.
Precisely.
God help us if that ever becomes normal, because we've always agreed throughout the Cold War and after that this was not a rational means of waging war. And if we've gone beyond that, then God help this earth. But I guess my final question, we're hearing these reports of the U.S. military members being told they're going into this war to usher in Armageddon, to usher in the end times. And I wonder if people are thinking anymore in terms of, is the command and control structure in the U.S. military, has it deteriorated to that degree where now they're giving people very, I would say, heretical theological lessons on the way to a war? And this is crazy. Let's call it what it is. This is crazy. You're ushering in Armageddon. I thought we were there to stop Armageddon, not to usher in the Third World War.
Look, I am not an overtly religious person. I am not really a churchgoer. I was raised as a Quaker. So I tend to be very private about my views spiritually. And I've never been comfortable with people that want to proselytize, least of all those that want to proselytize to me. So it's very hard for me to understand, but this is something that I saw begin in the 80s. It grew or metastasized into the early 90s. And then I think it dropped off a bit. It seems to have had something of a revival. When Sigmund Freud visited the United States in 1921, 22, in that time frame, he described us as a theocracy. I mean, that's what he said. And if you go back and look at the Scopes monkey trial, the fights against evolution and so forth, we've always had this element of what I would call radical biblical Christianity on the Protestant side. And it should not intrude into the military, but it apparently has. There was a time when I had friends that told me, if you want to be a brigade commander, a battalion commander, this is when I was a captain, and then later on as a major, they said, you got to go to Bible study with the CG, the commanding general. Yeah. And some of these commanding generals actually held Bible study in their homes. Well, they have every right to do that. Yeah. And nobody's objecting to that, but you don't have the right or the professional obligation to sort out who you advance on the basis of the individual's profession of faith. And of course, it was very easy to find people that would profess anything you wanted to get promoted. So let's be frank, that was nonsense. So I hope something will be done to turn that around. Unfortunately, as I think you know, Pete Hegseth is this self-styled Christian Zionist and Bible-beating character.
Yeah.
So you have that at the top right now. That may be part of the problem. I don't know.
That certainly is. And I think it's the hatred of Iran. It's almost like it's a total deflection in many ways.
Well, this is funny, and you'll appreciate this because you're Canadian. I was looking through something and found the census from 1795. I was looking for the time when my MacGregor ancestors left the Highlands and moved down towards Edinburgh, because my great-great-grandfather had several businesses in Edinburgh, been very successful. And so anyway, I found the census. That was the first time we found a MacGregor that was not in the Highlands, was in 1795. And sure enough, it was my great-great-great-grandfather and his family. And they were right outside of Edinburgh, and they listed religion. And you were either Church of Scotland, or you were checked in a different box that said nonconformist. Check box, nonconformist. I thought was wonderful. That simply meant that you were some sort of pagan heathen that had not joined the Church of Scotland. Well, I come from a long line of those people.
Well, that's a great anecdote. Well, all I can say at this point, and we're both watching and waiting to see what happens here, but I hope saner heads prevail in this war. And as much as I oppose this war, and as much as I say people like you were 100% correct about the consequences, and I think I was right about this, I don't want to be right. I want this war to be over, because I think we are on the verge, as you have said many times, of a total catastrophe that's coming from so many directions. And if there's no way out of this, God help this war right now. And I'm seeing far too many people in my own country just say, this is a great thing. It's a great war. Just get Iran, regime change. And people have to start thinking about the consequences of the words. That's something you say all the time. So, Colonel Doug MacGregor, thank you so much for your commentary, your analysis on this war, and the fact that you are out there every day telling the truth about what this war means for us all. So I want to thank you for coming on the show today, but also for all of the work you're doing on so many podcasts, because the last wars I watched on Fox. This one I'm not watching. I'm only watch Fox to see what they're saying. I'm watching social media. I'm watching shows like Redacted and others. I'm watching you. I'm watching Colonel Dan Davies. I'm watching others like that talk about what's really happening. And if that's, I think, where most of us have our ears and eyes tuned to right now. So thanks so much, Colonel MacGregor.
Thank you, David. Bye-bye.
Always a pleasure, and we'll see you again.
Good.
Bye for now. Colonel Douglas MacGregor, former advisor to Defense Secretary to Donald Trump, combat veteran, United States Army, brilliant analyst. We'll be back in a minute after this brief break.
Who cares?
thanks for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed that interview with Colonel Douglas MacGregor. And I'll be back again tomorrow. We've got lots to talk about here today. God bless you all.
Thank you for sharing this station with your friends and family. Thank you for hitting that like button, because I tell you, we are fighting back in a way I've never had to before, because I'm going to keep this station on the air. I'm going to keep fighting for freedom. I'm going to keep fighting for justice and truth. And I am damn determined to resist this Carney government in any way possible as it encroaches upon our individual freedom. And it will continue to do that, mark my words. I'll be back again tomorrow. Same time, same place. 10 a.m. This has been David Crayden, broadcasting live from our nation's capital in Ottawa. Thank you for watching. We'll see you again tomorrow.